In 2024, the Scott Peterson case. A name synonymous with one of America's most infamous murder trials, got a shocking new chapter. The Los Angeles Innocence Project, a group famous for exonerating the wrongfully convicted, officially took on his case. Peterson is the man convicted of murdering his wife Laci and their unborn son Connor, in a trial that was built almost entirely on circumstantial evidence. So, when a group like the Innocence Project gets involved, it forces us to ask a question that's been lingering for over 20 years. What if the story we were all told was wrong? What if the evidence that sent Scott Peterson to prison for life wasn't just circumstantial, but deeply flawed? This isn't just a story about a crime. It's about doubt, justice, and why, after all this time, the Scott Peterson case still haunts America. It was December 24, 2002, in Modesto, California. Laci Peterson, who was 27 years old and just weeks away from giving birth to her first child, was full of life. To everyone who knew them, she and her husband Scott looked like the perfect American couple. They had a loving marriage, a nice home, and were about to welcome their son Connor into the world. That Christmas Eve morning, Scott Peterson claims he left Laci at home, getting ready for the holiday. He says he went on a solo fishing trip to the San Francisco Bay, which is about 90 miles away. When he got back that evening, he told police the house was empty. Laci's car was still in the driveway. Her purse and keys were on the counter. But Laci was gone. Her family knew right away that something was terribly wrong. A massive search kicked off, with family, friends, and the entire community desperately searching for the missing mom-to-be. The story blew up nationwide, and you couldn't turn on the news without seeing Laci's smiling face. In those first few frantic days, Scott Peterson stood with his family, pleading for his wife's safe return. But as the search for Laci grew, so did the suspicion of the last man to see her alive. From the very beginning, the police zeroed in on Scott's story. A guy going fishing by himself on Christmas Eve, 90 miles from home, just didn't sit right with a lot of people. His demeanor during press conferences also raised eyebrows. He seemed weirdly calm, almost disconnected, for a man whose pregnant wife had just vanished. But it was the discovery of his secret life that would turn the public completely against him. Just weeks into the investigation, a massage therapist from Fresno named Amber Frey came forward with a bombshell. She told police she'd been having an affair with Scott Peterson. He had told her that he'd lost his wife and would be spending his first Christmas alone. With that one revelation, the image of the grieving husband was shattered. In its place was a liar and a cheat. The affair gave prosecutors exactly what they were missing: a motive. They started building a case that Scott Peterson wanted out of his marriage and the responsibilities of being a father so he could be with his mistress. Amber Frey, who had been unknowingly caught in the middle of all this, started working with the police, recording her phone calls with Scott. Those tapes, full of his deceptions and emotional manipulations, became the soundtrack to the media frenzy and the heart of the prosecution's case. For the public, the thinking was simple. If he could lie so icily about this, what else was he lying about? For 4 agonizing months, there was no sign of Laci Peterson. Then, in April 2003, everyone's worst fears came true. The body of a baby boy washed up on the shore of the San Francisco Bay. Just 1 day later, the body of a recently pregnant woman was found only a mile away. DNA tests confirmed the unthinkable. It was Laci and her son Connor. And in a final damning twist, they were found in the exact same area where Scott claimed he'd gone fishing on Christmas Eve. 4 days later, Scott Peterson was arrested. Near a golf course in San Diego, he didn't look like a grieving husband. He looked like a man on the run. He had dyed his hair blonde, grown a goatee. His car was stuffed with over $10,000 in cash, camping gear, and a handful of cell phones. For the police and for most of the country watching, this wasn't what an innocent man did. It sealed his fate in the court of public opinion. He was charged with 2 counts of murder first degree for Laci and second degree for Connor. The stage was set for one of the biggest trials in modern history. But for many, the verdict was already in. The trial of Scott Peterson, which started in 2004, was a full-blown media circus. But it was also a case built almost entirely on a story. because the prosecution had almost no physical evidence. There was no smoking gun. No murder weapon was ever found, and no crime scene was ever identified in the Peterson home. The bodies were so decomposed that a clear cause of death couldn't even be determined. So, prosecution wove a narrative out of Scott's behavior, his lies to Amber Frey, that strange Christmas Eve fishing trip, at a location where the bodies washed ashore, the way he looked, and what he had with him when he was arrested. They argued that when you put all these pieces together, it painted an undeniable picture of a guilty man. As his own defense attorney, Mark Geragos, later said, Wavin Scott was convicted on the he didn't act right evidence, pointing out that there's no rule book for how you're supposed to act when your pregnant wife disappears. The defense team argued that the police got tunnel vision from day one, focusing only on Scott and ignoring other leads. They hammered on the fact that there was no direct evidence, but in the face of Scott's lies and the sheer horror of the crime, their arguments just didn't land with the jury. After 9 days, the jury found Scott Peterson guilty. In 2005, he was sentenced to death. For years, that seemed to be the end of it. A monster was off the streets. But for a lot of people, including Scott's family, there were nagging questions that never went away. These doubts are the reason the case still has such a grip on us. And they all stem from the fact that he was convicted without any direct proof. The biggest alternative theory revolves around a burglary that happened right across the street from the Petersons' house. Scott's defenders have always argued that Laci might have seen the burglars that day, confronted them, and was then kidnapped and murdered. They claim the jury never heard key evidence about this, including details about a burned-out van tied to the burglars that supposedly had a blood-stain. Its mattress inside a mattress, they say, was never properly tested. On top of that, there were witness sightings. Several people reported seeing a woman who looked like Laci walking her dog in the neighborhood after Scott had supposedly left for his fishing trip. Investigators dismissed these as unreliable, but they poke a hole in the prosecution's timeline. If Laci was alive after Scott left, he couldn't have killed her. It's these loose threads to the burglary, the sightings, total lack of a murder weapon or crime scene that have kept this debate raging for 2 decades. The case took a huge turn in 2020 when the California Supreme Court threw out Peterson's death sentence because of serious errors in how the jury was selected. A year later, in 2021, he was resentenced to life in prison without parole. But the real fight was for a completely new trial in January 2024. That fight got a major new ally, the Los Angeles Innocence Project. In a massive court filing, they argued that Peterson never got a fair trial and that they have new evidence that can prove he's innocent. They're challenging every part of the prosecution's case. They claim new science shows Connor died a week later than the prosecution argued, which would mean Scott couldn't have been the killer. They're also pushing for new, modern DNA testing on key evidence. As of mid-2025, the legal fight is very much alive. A judge did grant permission for new DNA testing on a piece of duct tape found on Laci's pants, something that old technology couldn't get results from. However, the court has denied most of the other requests for testing, like on that controversial mattress from the van. And in June 2025, an appeals court shot down most of Peterson's claims, but kept one critical issue on the table: the possibility that a biased juror may have tainted the original verdict. This legal battle is far from over, and we are going to be following every single twist and turn. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss an update, and we want to know what you think. Head down to the comments and tell us, based on what we know, do you think Scott Peterson is guilty, or does this case deserve a second look? The Scott Peterson case left a deep and troubling scar on the American psyche. It's a story that can be told in 2 completely different ways. In one version, a narcissistic husband murdered his wife and unborn son to run away from. His life and justice was served. In the other, a man was convicted by the media in a flawed investigation. While the real killers might still be out there, the Innocence Project getting involved doesn't mean Scott Peterson is innocent. But it does mean that the doubts about his conviction are real enough for a world-class legal team to step in. Their fight forces us to ask some really uncomfortable questions about our justice system. How much should a person's behavior count as evidence? How can anyone get a fair trial when the whole world is watching? And can a verdict ever feel truly right when it's based on a story with no hard proof? Until we have answers, the ghost of Laci Peterson and the controversy around her husband will continue to haunt us all.